How's it going? Welcome to another video. You're about to feast your eyes on what I think is the easiest and quickest way to level up your drone footage, to create cinematic, movie-esque drone footage. Before I dive into explaining what that is and how to use it, check this out. Today we're talking about the Freewell Anamorphic ND filters, and boy, are they sick. You literally pop one of these on your drone and boom, you're instantly shooting movie quality videos. Not literally, but it does make your footage look pretty epic in my opinion, and it's so easy to do. Before I get too deep into this video, I think it's only fair to state that Freewell did send me these ND filters to test and share my completely unbiased opinion with you guys. No, I was not paid for it. They just gave me the ND filters to try out. So think what you will when it comes to that, but just wanted to leave that there. But side note, this is the first time a company has sent me a product to review on this channel, so I'm kind of stoked about that. In the rest of this video, I'm going to talk about what an anamorphic lens actually is, what it does, and how to use it on your Mavic Air 2 to achieve cinematic looking footage like you just saw. So I think we can all agree that that footage looked pretty sick, but let's break it down. What actually is an anamorphic lens? Honestly, I'm not going to dive too deep into that here because there are way more qualified people to explain that to you, much more knowledgeable people on YouTube about the subject, but here is a quote from red.com. Anamorphic lenses project a version of the image that is compressed along the longer dimension. Anamorphic lenses therefore require subsequent stretching in post-production in order to be properly displayed. All right, that sounds like a cool definition, but what do they do? Basically, anamorphic lenses give your footage a couple unique looks, aka the anamorphic look. I'm sure you've seen this look in countless movies, just to name a few: Godzilla, X-Men, The Avengers, so many movies. The first, and I think most iconic and noticeable effect of an anamorphic lens are those horizontal lens flares across the screen, those blue streaks you see. They also make your bokeh, or that blurred out stuff behind what's in focus, ovular instead of circular. Now that part doesn't really play in here because essentially when you're shooting with drones, everything's in footage, you don't have much bokeh, but for the sake of saying it, if you had a true anamorphic lens, that would be another effect. So how the heck do we achieve that cinematic looking footage with our drone, with the Mavic Air 2? Here's a few tips. Love sparkling water. Okay, first, you have to shoot into something with a lot of light. You're only gonna get those horizontal lens flares if you're shooting at a subject that's bright. That's a reason why this look is so popular in car commercials, because it's especially easy to get those nice anamorphic lens flares when you have car headlights, and that's why I chose to shoot a car to test these lenses out. The second thing to keep in mind is the darker it is outside, obviously the brighter your light's gonna be, so again, the more intense the anamorphic effect is gonna be. Anamorphic. At first, it was too light out to get the dramatic effect I was looking for, so I bumped up to ND16 from my ND8, and that kind of seemed to do the trick. It made those blue anamorphic flares much more punchy, so you might want to keep that in mind. My next tip, and this one I think is super important, is simply don't overuse this look. I find it the most tasteful when it's sprinkled in here and there, and that's why I chose to not shoot that entire video with the anamorphic lens. I shot with my A7S III and then sort of sprinkled in these cinematic anamorphic shots here and there. Now, yes, I know technically I would also be shooting anamorphic on my A7S III so that the footage is congruent. They're both using anamorphic lenses, but I broke the rules a little bit and I still think it looks pretty darn good. Not that I know because I didn't go, but I assume that's not something they're going to tell you in film school, is to break the rules, but who cares? Creativity is whatever you want it to be. Anyways, and lastly, don't forget to focus on things like nailing your composition, your exposure, those other basic elements of just achieving nice looking footage. I know that might make the title seem a little bit misleading on this video, but you can't just completely throw out everything else you know about filmmaking and just slap these filters on and expect to have amazing footage. Yes, they add a whole new element to your footage and it's super easy to do, which is why I'm making this video, but you still have to have a cool and interesting shot to begin with to produce a cool and interesting shot. Okay, so fast forward a little bit. You've shot some epic footage. Now it's time to start editing. Before we jump in, there's one extra step we need to do that most of us probably aren't used to doing. We need to de-squeeze the footage, meaning we need to stretch it out to the widescreen ratio that it was meant for and your footage doesn't look all smushed up. Now, what I'm about to show you is probably not the most industry standard way of editing anamorphic footage, but it's quick, easy, it looks great, and it works for me. So don't roast me too hard. I'm editing in Final Cut Pro X, as you can see, but this method applies to any editor you're using. Since this lens has a de-squeeze factor of 1.5x, we're gonna stretch it horizontally by 15%. All we do is stretch it back out horizontally on the x-axis from 100% to 115%. Then I throw a letterbox on with a 2.35 to 1 ratio to give it that classic cinematic movie look. And that's all. Now, obviously you have to go through and color correct your footage, which I'm not going to talk about in this video. I'll link it somewhere up here. I do have another video where I go more in depth on color grading and correcting Mavic Air 2 footage. But to summarize my overall thoughts on the Freewell Anamorphic ND lenses, I absolutely love them. It's not an ND filter that's going to live on my camera all the time. In fact, it's definitely a more specialty use type of effect, and that's how they're designed to be. But when I'm creating something that needs that cinematic movie feel, those anamorphic streaks, I'll definitely be throwing it on there, and it does what it's designed to do really, really well, actually. I'm pretty surprised. I wouldn't consider these anamorphic lenses true anamorphic lenses because you don't get that ovular bokeh that I mentioned earlier, so it's not a perfectly fair comparison to compare these with like $10,000 anamorphic lenses, but they look great. Who do I think these lenses are for? Well, I think they're for anyone who watched that little video in the beginning of this video and thought that footage looked cool. If you want to add a little flair to your videos, something a little extra, a little something something, then go for it. They're not the cheapest option at about $40 in ND, and I would recommend getting 3, the ND8, the ND16, and at least the 32. They also have a 64 if you're shooting in really bright conditions. So it definitely adds up, but if you haven't noticed by now, filmmaking is not a cheap hobby or career path. And I'll leave you with that for today. If you are a Mavic Air 2 owner or you're in the market to buy one, I have a full setup guide, full beginner's guide, all the way from opening the box to getting your first flight and then achieving cinematic footage. I'll link that there. And then if you want to take it one step further, I have a full color grading and correction tutorial for the Mavic Air 2. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. I hope we had some fun here together. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace. One last note here. Sorry, no video next week. You know how it is, Christmas, New Year's. Enjoying some time off, enjoying time with the family. I suggest if you can, you do the same. Doesn't hurt. See you guys next year. Peace.